Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Runyon. I'm your worship associate this morning. Welcome to Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We, the members of the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship, mindful of the rich diversity and essential oneness of human experience, covenant to weave the fabric of community from the strands of our separate lives. This is our pledge, to create for ourselves and our children a spiritual home that will nurture, challenge, and offer us renewal, to seek what is true even as we celebrate the mystery of existence, to reach out to all who share our liberal religious values and participate in the broader Unitarian Universalist movement, to work for social justice and the well-being of our planet Earth. We have a few announcements this morning. First of all, the annual support drive is underway, and thank you to everybody who has pledged so far. As of the drafting of the order of service today, that was 111 people, so thank you all very much. To learn more about the pledge drive, please visit the website or Realm. And today, if you have any questions, Candace Donaldson and Helene Firm will be in the dining room after the service, and they will be very happy to answer any questions you have and talk through any issues or concerns or questions about the finances for the addition or the budget or any of those good things. At 11:15 today, there will be a mindfulness meditation in the parlor. There will be a South African photo presentation by Bob Scott and Irene Mendelson at 11:45 in the meeting room and on Zoom. And the annual congregational meeting will be Sunday, June 4th, following the 10 a.m. service and a light lunch.
Good morning. I have to turn that on if you want to hear me. I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So pleased to welcome you all this morning and to welcome folks who are attending online. Today I'm talking about a change that we're contemplating as a national movement as Unitarian Universalists. We're looking at something we've called Article 2, and we've been talking about changes to the principles and purposes. I was 24, and I'd just been elected to the Board of Trustees when the principles and purposes were first voted on in 1984. And I'd never really noticed that there were principles and objectives, I think they called them, that had been made for the Unitarian Universalist Association when the Unitarians and Universalists had merged in 1961. And I'd grown up both, so I really hadn't been very aware as even a teenager of the difference between Unitarians and Universalists. I was very excited because we were talking about these new principles. And I said, oh, and what do the old principles look like? And they were all about men. I mean, man here, men there, brotherhood here, and guys there. I was like, whoa, because I'd been raised, at 24 years old, I called myself a feminist, even though I didn't really quite know what that meant as a 24-year-old guy, but the strong women who had been part of my life, both in congregational life and in my family life, guys, men, brotherhood, man, just didn't work for me. So we were at the annual meeting of all the Unitarian Universalists called General Assembly, and it was 1984, and I got to be a delegate from my congregation in Columbus, and I was there, and I was very excited, and we were at one of the pre-meetings to talk about the changes, and there was this older man there. I feel like I can talk about older men now since I'm kind of older myself, and he was almost in tears and just angry about the fact that we were making changes to the principles and objectives, as they were called, from 1961. And I had just gotten to know one of the women who had chaired the commission to draft the new principles for 1984. They'd been working on them for 4 years. And I said to her, man, brotherhood, men, dudes, I mean, why is he stuck on that old thing? And she very kindly said, he was such an important, loving presence in 1961, and Unitarians and Universalists were trying to work out how they could talk about being one denomination or one association of congregations. We almost didn't get there, she said. And he really got us there. This is hard for him because for him it feels like we're giving up a lot. And I thought about that. Several days later, we cast the first vote on the principles and the purposes as that came to be called, and as we call them now, which we still have in this moment. And I thought, and I watched as the vote came. And one of the most striking moments of my life was to watch him with tears in his eyes when it came time to vote yes or no, to raise his delegate card and his hand for yes to make the change in 1984. And I've never forgotten that. And I've never forgotten the way in which he and others made Unitarian Universalism so vivid and so alive for a young guy like me at the age of 24. I remain grateful to him and to all of those who gave me my Unitarian Universalism. Talk more about those changes today, what's coming for us. We have, after these opening words, lighting of the chalice.
As Reverend Joel lights our chalice, let's say together, love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
We're going to sing together now. Love will guide us. If you can see it here on the screen. If you'd like to use the books, it's in the gray hymnals, number 131, should be on your screen at home. I invite you to stand and bow to your spirit. Milestones and passages are a time when we are enacting a kind of love, the love of life, of our humanity, the love that we enact through relationship and community. It's kind of listening, a listening love. A milestone in passage this morning comes from Judy Bjorklund. She writes, "My friend Carol and I share something in common. Both of our fathers fought in World War II. Carol's father gave his life in the war, never returning. She was raised by her mother and grandparents, and by sheer good fortune, my father came home, and he was there for me all my life. Each Memorial Day, I appreciate the sacrifices so many have given for us." In my own family's life, my partner's mother, my partner's Deborah Hafner, her mother Harriet Hafner died on Wednesday. And I had both the privilege and the honor to be with my partner, Deborah, when her mother died during hospice. And I will add as a gratitude, I'm grateful to be serving a congregation that is so loving and caring when any of us experience significant milestones and passages in our lives. It's always good, I've found, to remember gratitude as a way to restart a spiritual practice in any given moment. And I did notice as I drove up this morning, and someone had submitted a gratitude card this morning. They are grateful for the gardens and those who tend to them. I invite us into a spirit of meditation, prayer, or contemplation, as is appropriate. Spirit of life, in this moment we give thanks and express our gratitude for those who, in their love for us, in their commitment to our freedoms, gave their very lives, defending our democracy, our freedoms, our lives. There are many ways in which we all sacrifice, and those greatest sacrifices make possible the changes, the progress, the surprises, the beauty, the freedom that we enjoy. For them and for all who sacrifice to bring us together in life and love today and every day, let us, in these moments of silence that follow, give our thanks and remember. For all these thoughts, gratitudes, prayers, or meditations, or thoughts, let us say, Amen, so be it. Blessed be. Let's sing together again. I loved hearing the choir this morning singing. You guys already sing really well, but you get the choir here. It's really exciting. Number 159, and it's on the screen. I can remember singing that when I was a child or in youth group in our congregations. The tune is written by a Finnish fellow named Sibelius, I believe. Is that right, Michael? Yeah. Yeah, Finnish national anthem, I think. It is, yeah. But such a beautiful tune, and I remember them singing it, and the men who I would find out later were veterans. This was a deeply moving hymn for them to sing. I can recall to this day. I remember how they would talk about how they understood that as Unitarian Universalists, that when they had served in the Army or the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, maybe something like the Civil Air Patrol, they had served for what they understood to be love. And so I thought today that I would offer you this reading by a younger Unitarian Universalist. This reading is entitled Love. Love cannot be bought or sold. It does not make a profit. Love does not hide from truth. Love dives deep. Love takes on flesh, bodies. Love is queer. Love is straight. Love is erotic. Love is asexual. Love confronts evil. Love delights in pleasure. Love touches and weeps and feeds and creates. Love is risky. Love challenges systemic evil in all forms. Love is simple. Love is not easy. Love is collective. And love rises up. Love apologizes. Love believes. Love corrects. Love pays reparations or makes amends. Love heals. Love tells its story. Love embraces everyone, each of us, every creature, all of creation, and knows us intimately, holds us as one collectively. Love transcends every boundary that seeks to confine it. It will not tolerate violence in its name. It does no harm. Love only sets free. We take our offering now. Our offering is taken today, the plate split with family promise. Another form of love, especially for those who do not have roofs over their heads and who we can help in their times of need. Perhaps sometime that will be our time of need. One of the other things that veterans used to say, and my experience of veterans growing up anyway, I had not known any women and there were no people who were non-binary who were out, but the people I did know, the men, would talk about, they would almost, I think there was no exception to their saying to me, if we were in conversation, I and the people who gave their lives, we fought defending democracy. We fought defending the right of those other guys to be wrong. And they meant it. And they had an expectation that the same commitment would be made by the guys who were wrong to our freedom to be, well, right or wrong, depending on your perspective. Boy, these days in the United States, how many folks would make a commitment like that? When we had the Drag Story Hour about a month ago, it turned out there was a protest, and I think I may have mentioned they couldn't protest because there's no sidewalks in this part of the neighborhood. So there was no place for them to go, and we weren't going to let them on our property. So they were half a mile away, I think. It was apparently the local chapter of an organization called the Mothers of Liberty. I'm sure they would love to cancel the fellowship in the same way they're censoring books in any school library that they possibly can. I'm not sure if they can actually use the word liberty, if they're just thinking about their liberty but not yours or mine. I'm a little confused by how they think they own the word, and I'm especially disturbed by how many of them have connections with the Proud Boys and other people who tried to overthrow our democracy on January 6th, 2021. Those veteran Unitarian Universalists I knew and know now, and there are people who are male, female, non-binary, transgender even. They weren't and are not being glib when they talk about sacrificing comfort, time, perhaps even someday their lives for the rights of folks they disagree with. The Unitarian Universalists would gladly echo these words of the great Universalist Hosea Ballou. He wrote these words 200 years ago. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not agree in love, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. As I mentioned in my opening words, I'm really so grateful. I'm so grateful to be a Unitarian Universalist and to be able to be with a people who can look so deeply into what connects us in this given moment and without disregarding, not to disregard what's been given to us from the people who came before, those previous generations. Be aware of what we have now and find the right words and ways of expressing it and hand it on to the future, knowing they will pick it up, change it, and live with it in ways we cannot imagine. And I'm grateful to live in a tradition like this. Those elders that I mentioned, not all of them veterans necessarily, they taught me a lot about the practice of love. They were generous in their mentoring of me. They sacrificed a lot for what we call this Unitarian Universalism. Sometimes we call it our living tradition. In fact, you'll see that term. It appears in a lot of places. This old hymn book, older hymn book now about 35 years old, singing the living tradition. There's a service at the General Assembly that celebrates ministers when they've become newly fellowshipped and ordained, or when they've retired, or when they have died. It's called the Service of the Living Tradition. The UUA has a fund for its religious professionals, religious educators, musicians, ministers. It's called the Living Tradition Fund, and it's there to help those who whose careers are in service to our congregations. And we use this term living tradition, because it's a way of remembering we've existed in the past, we exist now, and we will exist in ways we don't really know yet, but we will be serving those in the future. A living tradition understands that truth and meaning constantly evolve across generations. So this means that we've understood for all of our 5 centuries as Unitarians and Universalists, and then eventually Unitarian Universalists, we've understood that we have to be open to growth and to change in ways that can be very challenging. So why preach about this now in this particular context? Because in 4 weeks, the annual meeting of all the Unitarian Universalist congregations in the United States will be held in Pittsburgh. It's called the General Assembly. We've been having, on our Unitarian side, we've been having a General Assembly for just about 200 years now. We will bring together at this General Assembly in Pittsburgh delegates from over 1,000 of our congregations, and we are one of our principles is the democratic process, and so our national association and the living tradition itself is governed democratically by votes from delegates of our congregations. And the big decision this year is what we call Article 2. Are we going to change the bylaws, the part of the UUA bylaws that have within them those now 8 principles, the 8 principles of the Unitarian Universalist Association? I confess, I had a lot going on. It was a pandemic. As an interim minister, I'm moving sometimes when they make big announcements and I miss things. And last summer, I suddenly was going through my email and, wait, revise the 7 principles? What? Don't be messing with my 7 principles, I was thinking. Who does that? Oh, yeah, Unitarian Universalist. And I thought to myself, a lot of us consider these sacred. And then I thought, well, they are sacred. And so is a living tradition. And then I remembered, well, first thing I remembered was, oh, wait a minute. On our Universalist side, we did this in 1790, I think it was 1803, and then 1835, and then 1870, and the Unitarian side, I think it was 1835, and then 1865. Oh, and the Universalists did it again in 1935, and then we merged, and both sides did it in 1961, and then we did it again in 1960. We've been doing this a long time, about every 50 years-ish. We didn't always have the freedom to make these changes. In Romania, when our congregations had the freedom at least to meet, they were the other 3 religious groups that were allowed legally to meet told us Unitarians, okay, make yourself a creed, we'll approve it if we can tolerate it, otherwise, and you can't change it. And then they didn't let them change our Unitarian congregations in Romania, change it for centuries. It just had this complete confusion about who and what we are. It was tough when we merged, trying to bring these different statements together. But it was tough even before then. There were always folks who preferred alternatives to the faith statements that we adopted, either as Unitarians or Universalists. One of the most well-known statements of faith and theology was written by a fellow minister, a Unitarian minister named James Freeman Clark. And actually, his statement of faith was far more popular than any of the official Unitarian statements of faith. It was so popular that it was held not just by the Unitarians in his congregation, but He was the most popular spiritual writer in the United States in the 1870s, 1880s. He outsold any other spiritual writer by quite a margin. In a sermon that guided the Unitarian movement for the next 50 years, James Freeman Clarke outlined the 5 points of his faith, of his theology. And these points were the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation through character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. All the guy language again, too. Now, in the 19th, it may not sound particularly radical to us, but in the 1870s, 1880s, those were really out there theological statements. That was a radical statement of faith. And yet a lot of people in the United States, many of them not Unitarians, were really lived their lives by these principles and the way that James Freeman Clarke wrote about them. I have to say, even when I was growing up, there was still something of James Freeman Clarke's principles still at play. I remember that we would say at church sometimes, after we had maybe finished a difficult project or come through a difficult conflict, we would say, okay, onward and upward. But James Freeman Clarke still understood, as Christocentric as his particular points were, as theistic as they were, probably much more theistic than any of us would prefer, and certainly way more patriarchal than I think we would even tolerate today. James Freeman Clarke still understood we are a living tradition. Our statements are never finished, never perfect, even in the moment. So the Unitarians and Universalists, when merging and trying to merge in 1960, were having these intense discussions and really struggling over how are we going to describe the role of Jesus? How are we going to describe our theology in terms of God? And that was the focus of the conversation they had. But boy, all of the statements about brotherhood and man, and I know some of our older members here were very much involved in women's spirituality, and there's still a very vital women's spirituality group here in the fellowship. And when women in the 1970s really began claiming their equal place in congregational life as Unitarian Universalists, they would look at these principles and goals of the new UUA, and they would go, where am I in this? So in 1977, the delegates passed a resolution. It was entitled Women and Religion, and it called on our movement to remove the sexist theology from our principles and from the reasons we have a national association. And the resolution called for a more open and accepting spiritual diversity. There was a lot of resistance at first, but the calls kept coming from our congregations. And finally, the Board of Trustees of the UUA said, all right, we're going to make the changes. And it's in a process that was as open and inclusive as possible. All Unitarian Universalists were invited to have input into the revision of those principles from 1961. And in those very contentious times, things went remarkably well. At the 1984 General Assembly, the current principles and purposes had their first vote. You have to vote twice. We had to vote in 1984 and again in 1985 because we want to be really sure when we adopt them. It's not just the vote of this moment. So it's 2 years of meetings by which we adopt a change that's substantial. I have to mention that there was one point. Now, I was very much, at 24, I was a fierce humanist. So theistic language was not something I was comfortable with. In fact, I might have been a little bit, I'll be honest, I was a bit of a jerk about it sometimes. But there was this one moment when a fellow humanist got up and made a motion to remove from, there's another part in the principles and purposes that talks about our roots. And this fellow made a motion to remove any reference to our Christian or Jewish heritage, our Christian or Jewish roots. And the Christians were, I actually was looking at that one older man who had worked so hard to bring the Unitarians and Universalists together in 1961. And I just remember the look on his face. And then I was thinking about Al and Eunice Lovejoy, who were old-style Universalists. They were the sweetest, most loving people. If in Universalism, if you were a theist, especially back in the old days, God is love. God is a loving presence, and everybody goes to heaven. There's so much love. And Albert and Eunice Lovejoy lived that. I was still very humanist, and even so. But then the guy proposed this motion, and I was so angry that he would do that. And I got up and I said, what are we? Why would we be trying to pass principles of inclusion and then say, oh, but if you're this, you can't come? I remember being so angry about it, and I was relieved when the delegates pretty resoundingly voted it down, including a number of notable humanists who I later learned were notable humanists. And I was pleased that they voted against that motion. So we adopted those 7 principles. There are now 8 principles for us here in the congregation. We've been teaching these principles to our children. I raised my children on those 7 principles. Every congregation I've served has them on the walls, on our literature, on the website. If you want to see them, you can find them in the front of these hymnals, Singing the Living Tradition, right after the preface. There they are. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. They've meant a lot to me. How many of you really like the eight principles we have? I'm raising my hand too. Maybe you aren't happy or weren't happy to hear about them being altered or changed, really, at this point, replaced. I was not pleased at first. But then I was sitting down with my partner, who's a Unitarian Universalist minister, actually an interim minister in Long Island and Huntington, Reverend Deborah. And we were talking about these Article 2 changes. Article 2, by the way, is just the article in the UUA bylaws where the principles appear, where we describe the purposes and the values we gather around it. Well, let me ask you this. How many of you know what the principles say? What's the first principle? Yeah, you're pretty right on that. Old Universalist, yeah, inherent worth and dignity. Can you tell me what the second principle is? Don't look at the book. Oh, somebody's got a card. Okay, don't look at the card either. Can you do it off the top of your head? I confess. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I was kind of like, oh, there's democracy, there's world religion. Could I actually say the words? No. What's the other principle? I'm sure there's one you do know. Interdependent web. Boy, I've always got that one too. That's always right, fresh for me. The 8th principle, could you tell me the language in that, maybe? Diversity, yes. Anti-racism, anti-oppression. Our goal to be multicultural. It's really hard. And Deborah and I were a little shocked at ourselves when we sat down and said, can we go through these? 5 of the 8 we just couldn't even get. Right? And this is our job. Wow, okay. And actually, as I got to thinking about it, there are no verbs in those damn principles. It's just kind of like, there's a lot of nouns in there. And, I really like verbs. I'm very partial to verbs. Because, as Unitarians used to say, we're the religion of deeds, not creeds. It's not what you walk around believing. It's what you do. It's how we are with each other. That's all about being, and it's all about verbing. Verbing. Can I say that? I don't know. It is time, I've come to realize. It was hard for me to come to this understanding, this realization. We can express our shared spirituality in a more inclusive way. And as Unitarians and Universalists, it's been about 40 years. It's about the time. One of the things that really shifted my attitude toward the change, these Article 2 proposals, was when I looked at the commission that was formed to have conversations with all of our association and come to an understanding of how we would articulate our current UU theological values or spiritual values. And 3 of them are youth or young adults. 3 of them are people of color. And I've been around long enough that I know most of them, and I adore these people. I confess that 2 of the youth, actually both have come out of congregations where I served, and I know them. And I'm so moved to see their participation in something that's so vital to how we live as a people. The commission was formed, and this was their charge, to center love in our commitment to personal, institutional, and cultural change. A love rooted in anti-oppression, anti-racism, and in multiculturalism. And they put love at the center for a specific reason. Because when pollsters and religious sociologists survey Unitarian Universalists, and these are all non-UUs who have done these surveys or these polls, when they talk with us Unitarian Universalists and ask us, what's at the center of your faith? The word that by far most commonly comes up is love. And the way we use it is as a verb. And so the National Board said, as they formed this commission, help us find a new way of expressing who we are together as a people. And do it in a way that will lead us into the rest of the 21st century, but still honor the roots of our past. The study commission then distributed surveys to thousands of Unitarian Universalists and groups, various groups, ministers, religious educators, musicians, board presidents, younger Unitarian Universalists, Unitarian Universalists whose primary theological focuses may be Christianity or Islam or Judaism. 29 different groups of stakeholders. Over 11,000 different responses. So they submitted their final recommendations in March. And their final draft, as I mentioned earlier, it'll be voted on twice. First at this General Assembly in Pittsburgh, and then a year from now at the next General Assembly in 2024. So here is a cool slot. I love this cool device. Thanks, Alex. Love at the center. And there are still seven, well, they're not calling them principles, but you can find the principles in there. In fact, I put a link into the order of service, the one that's online or the paper one that you have. And I'll make sure that there's one in the e-news that comes out on Wednesday. And you can read the report. And you can read how each of these actually reflects the language that is in, and the values that are stated in all of the 8 principles, actually, that we currently have. But they've shifted the way we're using the language here. Love at the center there is a verb, as the board said. It's not what we have, because sometimes, I got to tell you, I'm not feeling especially loving. I have my moments, or being especially loving, but if it's a practice, if it's something that we're doing, and we shape it by those values that surround it, we get to an end that looks like those 7 principles, but includes those larger goals of being, well, a movement that is serving a greater number of people and a greater diversity on this planet Earth. The last thing about this is actually a covenant. And a covenantal theology is a very old Unitarian and Universalist theology. It comes out of the Christian and the Jewish tradition. And in the covenant, it's actually a promise we make to one another and how we want to live together in community. You have, for example, as a congregation, your right relations promise, which is a covenant theologically. You don't have to be a theist or even Christian or Jewish to share in the affirmation of a covenant and practice that covenant. So behind each of these single words is a simple sentence that describes the covenant or the practice. And so the commission writes, love, the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. Interdependence, there's the 7th principle. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. Pluralism, we celebrate that we are all sacred, and this begins with diversity in culture, experience, and theology. Justice. Now, this congregation does justice in the most beautiful, personal way. So I'm sure that it makes sense that the covenant for justice is we work together to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved community where all thrive. Transformation. I love the process, by the way, where they originally had the word evolution there, and they were actually taking that out of a black science fiction writer, Octavia Butler. And I love science fiction, and I love Octavia Butler. But a lot of folks looked at evolution, and they were like, I don't know about that. And they changed it to transformation, which I think is actually a more inclusive word. The covenant is, we covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Again, another one of our principles. Generosity. Deep roots there. We used to call ourselves liberal religion. Some of you may remember that was a term we often used to describe ourselves. Liberal literally means generous back in Latin. And the covenant is we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. A liberal spirit. And then equity. Every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. There's our first principle. I can see this on the website. And if you don't like this particular graphic, you can do your own graphic. That's what I actually like that a lot about that. I'm proud to be part of a religion that is always listening, always changing, always open to new collective interpretations and understandings. Indeed, the current commission wrote, we fully expect that one day another commission will review our work and significantly change it. We are writing this in pencil, not etching it into stone. I can't think of another religion where the guiding principles would be developed on an ongoing conversational, inclusive process, always in conversation, always changing, always reflective of who we are and who we are becoming, as well as where we've been. I loved it that Steve read the mission statement of the congregation this morning. Y'all haven't changed that since 1993. And you've grown and changed a lot. It's a great, by the way, it's a great mission statement. I was quite moved when I read it. And yet, is that still who you are, I wonder? What kind of changes might you make to it? Who have you become in ways that you haven't quite put words to yet? It's who we are as a living tradition, always changing, always finding new ways to express the love that makes us free and alive, growing and changing. Religious community, to paraphrase the religious historian Karen Armstrong, is not about accepting 20 impossible propositions before breakfast. It's just about doing things that change yourself. It's a moral aesthetic, an ethical alchemy. If you behave in a certain way, you will be transformed. And isn't this why we're here? To be transformed and to transform this world. To make this world one in which love is the guiding light for all people, regardless of how they practice or what they believe. Really, isn't this what we're here for? To love one another, to make the world a better place. May we always let our tradition live within us and through us. So be it. We're going to sing number 415. Ooh, Alex, can I hit the... I can make the screen shift by hitting a button. He gave me a little iPad to do it. It's really cool. I'm going to work on a sermon with a lot of slides because I can just do it myself. And Michael, I'm going to let you take the lead on this because this is a beautiful hymn, and I have not sung it in quite some time.
Sure, no. Yeah, this is how you pronounce it. Havenu Shalom Aleichem. And the way it's said rhythmically pretty much honors that quite well. Havenu Shalom Aleichem. Havenu, and I'll play it once through. It means understand and go in peace. So similar to what you'd say at the end of a memorial or celebration, go in peace. But it reminds you to understand and remember and go in peace. Done like at memorials, at services. I will be honoring both the reverent way of singing these words, but also the celebratory. So we'll sing it first slowly, and then I will go into that European klezmer, classic Jewish feel. No amount of times, I will start with that, and it will get into that lively klezmer feel, and then I'll close last, where we'll sing it slower. But just follow me, and we can just, if we're feeling the groove, we can sing it as many times as we like. And I will sing it as an intro. Yes, everyone stand. I'll sing it as an intro and play the melody, so you hear that, and then I'll do a normal intro like what we do before a song. Havenu Shalom Aleichem. Havenu Shalom Aleichem. Havenu Shalom Aleichem. Havenu Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Aleichem. Yeah, and it goes right in. Shalom Aleichem. Havenu. Shalom Aleichem, Avenu Shalom Aleichem, Avenu Shalom Aleichem, Avenu Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, Avenu Shalom Aleichem, Avenu Shalom.
May the love among us lead us to the greatest peace. And in this last remembrance for this Memorial Day weekend, a remembrance of Lieutenant Donaldson Tiller, a lovely athlete who will never grow old, who fell saving people he did not know. For this beautiful community and for the love within it and lived by it together and in the world at large. Thank you. Have a wonderful and meaningful Memorial Day weekend. Go in peace, be in peace. See you again next week. Please be seated.
my wife instead of her. She doesn't do it. It might not have been the first, but it was one of the first. Oh, okay. It was the worship arts committee.
Oh, okay, all right.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks for introducing yourself.
You got it. Yes, wishes to Deborah. It's hard to lose your mom. I mean, I haven't. It's so easy. So you put that in the middle of the group. It's so interesting. So when the researchers were how's that coming up in December?
And I spent listening to all those sermons on Zoom during the pandemic, writing down words to go in there. I don't know if you've ever looked at all the words, but every color has words.
Yes, you showed me that. Yes. I love it. It's so beautiful. Except that it has little Catholic arts on it. So.
Yes, it does. That's the only thing I bought during the pandemic was that ordered that Catholic tape.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't going to appreciate it. Anyway, I just want to point out, I'm glad I could love it.
That's very cool. Serendipitous. I love the choir today.
I like their playing.
Oh, thank you.
It was so fun.
I'm going to pick up this piece of trash I've been staring at all service.
But yeah, that was I saw a few tears on that. Yeah, it was fun, right? It worked out. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It can work. We can do it as slow as possible. Yeah, right. It was a work. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I saw some tears. This is my song. That worked out so well. I didn't play. I love it.
I was worried I was
Yeah, yeah, he's baritone. Yeah. Yeah. He does have a much better range. He's between the two of us. He's the singer. I dabble, but yeah, he was like into like musical theater as a kid and all that. Like I went to a very small private school, so I didn't get to do any of that. But I would have been that theater kid if I had gone to public school.
Right. No, it's ironic, right? Yeah, there's many of these private schools that happen. It's rare.
Yeah.
I know you feel it.
Yeah, so I went to a Seventh-day Adventist school. So my graduating class was senior year was 3. It was me and 2 other girls. About 100 kids from pre-K to 12th grade. We had a music program, but it was orchestra. And you had to, you picked your instrument by your grade. So I wanted to play clarinet. Because I had played it before in middle school, but I was told, no, you're in 9th grade and you play violin. And I said, I don't want to play violin. And they said, okay, you're playing violin. So I was forced to play violin. So I had, well, we didn't have, there was no, like woodwinds or anything. It was violins and, the kids, the little ones played recorders, the music teacher who spoke very little English played piano, and we had a cellist, and we were allowed one song we could have a drum, because, Adventists, they drums are evil.
Right.
Yeah, so,
You have to pick up you have to show me your sock before I leave. I'm so
oh
sorry.
no, you're fine.
Is it a purse?
No,
It's something
it's
weird. I'm
not-
trying to
it's
read the
not-
words.
Oh.